think as a creative, we want to be on the fringe, right? So we want to be exploring new movement. We want to be testing a climber just to the edge of what they're capable of doing or comprehending within a particular grade range. So what's amazing quality for me is when you're able to introduce some movement concept or something that the climber has maybe never experienced before, but you've done it in a way that allows them to organically unlock and discover whatever lesson you're trying to teach or movement style you want out of them, when they're not able to like necessarily predict this like sequence. And it's less, maybe it's even less about sequencing and it's more about just discovering how to move through a space.
Lord Byrum, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude, it took us a minute to get this together. We've been both traveling all summer in different areas, and I'm psyched to get to sit down with you. It's going to be worth the wait.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I just caught your podcast with Garrett, and it's really cool to see you incorporating a lot of some route setting content into your otherwise very climbing focused podcast. That's super cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm definitely on a bit of a setting kick. I I mean, it is a climbing focused podcast of athletes, but I mean, setting is, I mean, if you didn't have setters, you wouldn't have competitions. And now in today's world, I mean, what people really do is they climb on plastic in gyms, and there's nothing wrong with that, Ward. I love plastic. I freaking love plastic. I love climbing on bangers indoors, and so, yeah, man. Let's talk about commercial setting.
Perfect.
Okay, well, before we do it, let me just give the listeners just a little bit of context as to why you are one of the best people for us to be talking about commercial setting. Ward, you are the director of setting at movement for the East region of the US. And what that fancy title means to me is that you and your team set the tone for climbs that thousands and thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands, lots and lots of freaking climbers come through the doors of movement, which is, I think, the largest gym chain in the US, if not the world. And so that's a big deal, where these climbers spend most of their time on climbs set by your team. In fact, they may never go and climb on anything different than that. So to them, what you guys create and you girls create are climbing. And so, yeah, that's the context I want to set, because I don't think people realize the amount of influence someone like you and your team has on our sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of like you said, a lot of the climbers that come through our doors in the climbing gyms, they'll never experience climbing outside of maybe those four walls of that particular gym in the town they grew up in or where they live. So yeah, we're really ambassadors of the sport, and we get to kind of curate for the community what their climbing experience is, and try to provide as much variety and interest and learning opportunities as possible through that creation and cycling of products. So.
Ward, I just realized, do you want to do like a disclaimer? Because I know you're a big person in movement, but you're not speaking for movement. You're speaking as Ward, amazing route setter. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. I think it's hard to maybe separate the two, and a lot of my passion and work that I put into route setting and maybe share in private clinics or in private mentorship opportunities, whatever that looks like. Um, it is also kind of shared with movement as a brand. Me and the other directors of setting, we have six of them, and then a senior director of setting, Ryan Soule. We're really kind of the process creators for our route setting teams, but we're also kind of the culture and tone setters for the team. So a lot of it is like predicting changes in the industry or what our aesthetic function product standards may look like across multiple locations. Um, all of the training and equipment management and implementation, all that kind of stuff is sort of overseen at that director of setting level.
I want to get into every single one of those things you said. Uh, I'm curious, how closely does each region work together? Like, I guess, yeah. What's the expectation of consistency if I went to a gym across the country? Because movement, I theoretically kind of worked for movement at one point in my route setting career, but I worked for Plant Grant, which ended up being folded into the larger umbrella that is now movement. So, how does that work? Cross country.
I mean, there's a lot of like local flavor. I think with any route setting, the product itself needs to reflect the needs of the community. It also needs to reflect maybe the community's palate or appetite for certain types of climbs, movement, even kind of the skill range that may exist within that community. So all of that is very uniquely calibrated to each gym location, and maybe more directly overseen by like a head route setter or the normal full-time route setting team in that gym. It's not maybe possible for Ryan Soul, that's the senior director of setting. He's not going to have like a deep understanding of the community needs of all 34 movement locations. What we do in the director of setting layer is really kind of help and mentorship those head setters in understanding what maybe the local need is and where to make adjustments and how to calibrate things, and where we need to invest in either tools and materials or in people and training and mentorship. It's kind of understanding all of the kind of like staffing and material needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. That you kind of have to give some autonomy to the people who have the boots on the ground, getting that feedback. And it makes me think about how so gym climbing gyms have just blown up in the last 20 years. We've seen, I mean, the growth of climbing as a whole, but climbing gyms specifically has been amazing. And something that we've always noticed is that gyms will go into an area that did not have climbing, and then they kind of create a culture there. It's why climbing gyms in some way are the ones that have grown climbing itself, because it's, they come in for a birthday party, they stick around. And my long-winded lead up is, have you noticed that the climbs, the grade range appropriate for a gym goes up over time? Like, do climbs get harder and harder as you create a community that is basically stronger and stronger?
Uh, yes and no. Certainly, like the median skill level has continued to climb as gyms have become more popular and we're just churning more people through. So I think the more people that try a thing, the more it reveals itself who is like really passionate and talented about it or with it, and those people are going to continue to like raise that median level. I'll say as climbing gyms have continued to focus on kind of every demographic that may exist within a community and broaden who they consider like a target audience for climbing, the grade also maybe goes down a bit in that we have to spend a lot of time and care into crafting product that's acceptable for someone that just walks through the door for the first time that isn't necessarily an athlete or seeking to be a performance climber in that sense. So it's people uh, really just seeking a unique experience and maybe a community or some camaraderie or friendship within like that climbing space. So the grades also kind of go up and down, but definitely the median ability in a gym continues to rise for sure.
That makes sense, that you want to make sure that anyone who walks through the door gets hooked is basically, and that I like that. I want to see more people enjoying our sport. And I mean, climbing, when I think when you and I started Ward, it was a bit more fringe. And I didn't start out exactly through a birthday party, but honestly, I was 8 years old, and so it's similar in that idea, just kind of like this is cool. And it was a little more brutal. It was a little darker. You were a little more likely to get hurt somehow. The floors were a bunch of pea gravel or rubbers instead of nice soft mats, and so I think it took a certain type of person to get hooked, which probably you and me are that kind of person. But by opening it up, it really. I mean, it's no surprise that we have so many new climbers now due to those reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I was kind of like always a very natural climber, so climbing like trees and telephone poles, all kinds of stuff like that as a kid. And I went to a university tour at the University of Kansas and saw they had this like very primitive climbing wall in their rec center. And I knew I just wanted to be a climber. So I went home and I purchased like a blue water harness and like Grateful Dead chalk bag and some Frank Indo block chalk and a pair of moccasins. And yeah, from like day one of university, I went right to the rec center and was like, I want to rock climb. And I was very fortunate in that the University of Kansas had a very active climbing club. Maybe you wouldn't expect that, but there I found a lot of mentors in kind of my earlier stages of climbing. So like trad climbing and was a lot of the focus going to like Arkansas and stuff like that. So had like really amazing upbringing with that university experience.
Geez, I didn't realize you started in Kansas. I didn't see that coming, Ward. That's not where people often start. Well, so I know that you have lots of experience in the climbing industry in a whole variety of roles. Take us through that transition from finding the climbing wall at in Kansas during college to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a convoluted journey. I've worn a lot of hats in this climbing and outdoor industry. I quickly was the person like running the rec center climbing wall and leading like I was like vice president or something of the KURC, so the Rock Climbing Club at the university. So very early on, kind of gravitated towards climbing instruction and management of facilities, stuff like that. Sort of at the same time, I was also working as a buyer for an outdoor retailer. So like purchasing of equipment and started to establish some of these like relationships with sales reps and climbing and hold brands that I still have to this day in a lot of cases. Um, I did some firefighting training, but that was also part of like a rope rescue courses. So I was volunteering or then later being paid to help instruct rope rescue courses for fire departments. Uh, Transition at some point to wall install for Entrepreneur. So I worked as an installer for that company. Allowed me to see like work with Tony and Nero in setting some walls, some old legends like that. Kind of back to University of Kansas, I was able to uh, use that as a platform to access like route setting courses with Mike Pont and Stacy Fairbanks. So this is probably like late 90s, maybe 97, 98, something like that. Was kind of my first exposure to something beyond volunteer route setting, so that it could be maybe a career at that stage is an ambitious term, but something that could grow beyond just like trading for gym memberships, things like that. So my wall building led me to Bermuda, where I ran a climbing wall on the island of Bermuda for 3 years. Um, Obviously, not a huge, impressive climbing gym by any means, but it was just an incredible experience to like move to a foreign country, but also this tropical island, and really create a climbing culture. So we're introducing um, climbing to people that have never seen it, and able to kind of develop some deep water soloing on the island, and it was really an amazing experience. Met my wife, or met the person that became my wife there, and then we moved back to the States, and that's actually when I started. Um, kind of fully committed to route setting as my career path. And that was actually with Planet Granite, probably in 2007, somewhere in that ballpark. Worked with Planet Granite building their San Francisco gym, and then there was a transition in leadership, and I took over as a really the head route setter, but head route setting of the whole of the team for all three gyms. So there was the San Francisco that just opened, Belmont, and Sunnyvale. So I was overseeing setting operations for all three of those gyms, and then later moved back to the East Coast and was a head setter and then director of setting for Earth Treks. And then lo and behold, few years later, those two companies merged. I think it's like 2012, something like that. Those two companies merged together in combination with private equity to form LCAP Group, and then it's been like a slow folding in of some other brands and stuff to be the now 34 gyms that are part of the Movement brand.
Dude, some of the biggest freaking gyms I've ever seen in my life. I try to think how many Bermuda gyms fit inside even just the Planet Granite in San Francisco. That wasn't even that big a gym, but
Incomprehensible. Yeah, incomprehensible. Like that was definitely like a very small wall, but an incredibly like pivotal experience for me in like moving all the way across the country at the time, because I was living in Oregon. Move all the way to Bermuda. It was definitely incredible. Lived on a sailboat for a while. Super fun.
Ward, you did not leave a boring life. Definitely some fun stuff there. I'm gonna ask you to take me to Bermuda and show me some of the deep water soloing. Okay, because I know we both love that. A really quick random question about when you were building walls with EP. Was that during the time when they had those like insets? You know, when there'd be holes drilled into the wall, and then there was like these circular or sometimes hexagonal insets. You remember those?
I do vividly remember those. They were definitely on the climbing wall from the University of Kansas that I was talking about earlier. They were not really in fashion. I think they were still made, but not in fashion when I was an installer for Entreprise. They had transitioned to maybe the what they call the imprint product. Those are the square 1 meter panels that had a little bit of texture, but really like T-nuts still to have modular holes with some slightly usable natural features. And then really heavy in what they called freeform, which is like a kind of, I don't know, I'm probably misrepresenting what the product is, but some kind of like resin impregnated concrete. And we would shape that into faux rock. And it was really, really popular at like university campuses and rec centers, things like that.
It it's just funny how the evolution has changed from early gyms really trying to mimic outdoor rock. And those insets, people probably have never seen those, or a good chunk of them. They literally were cut into the wall so that you could basically, I mean, really the idea is that the hold would be more inside the wall or flush with the wall rather than sticking out, which is how rock typically is. And if you think about the evolution now, we put giant macros and volumes that stick out freaking far from all. It's like the exact opposite, and just it must be a trip for you seeing that evolution. Like do you remember like what were some of these moments in time where you thought, wow, things have changed in indoor gyms or setting?
Gosh, it's hard to remember indoor times. I mean, my maybe a hot take is I kind of wish the idea of these insets maybe came back. It'd be super cool to see like big volumes on the wall with like inset features that you could spin around and stuff. I think there's potential there. So if anyone's listening that wants to take on that task, I think there's a market. Maybe not a huge one, but I think it's a really cool approach. And I think you're exactly right. It kind of mimics how holds typically exist on real rock in that they're inset and not protruding from the surface so much. So it does provide like a really unique climbing experience. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to fully comprehend that indoor climbing is in still what I consider like its first generation. With commercial gyms starting in the mid 90s to now, people like myself that have found their way into a career in route setting. This is really the first generation. Like uh, there's not a lot of people that have gone through an entire career and then retired at age 60, 65, having route set as the dominant part of their work. Um, so definitely still just puts it in context how young of an industry it is, and what a meteoric kind of growth it's seen. It's just crazy.
Yeah, you're the old guard, even though you're the first guard. You're part of that first generation, and yeah, it's interesting you call it the first generation too. I mean, it is just chronologically for me when I walk into. I think the big aha moment for me was walking into Plant Granite Sunnyvale, which is just really a normal gym. I wouldn't. It doesn't have a modern walls built like I can't remember who built those. What you would probably remember. What was it? Waltopia was on. It's probably Entrepreneur. I don't even know. It might have been some of it self built.
I I want to say they were all self built. I know that our San Francisco location was all self built. I personally hung almost every piece of plywood in that gym, and the former owner, Mickey Lloyd, he was, hand sculpting the cracks himself. So it was very much like a ground up project. And a lot of the early Earth gyms were much in the same way. They would maybe partner with a wall builder, but it's kind of all hands on deck to try and get the project over the finish line.
Yeah, I totally blanked. It was definitely self. I remember, but maybe it was a little less of that modern thing when you walk into a gym now and you see these giant walls. They all almost have a similar look and feel because they're built by one of the three big wall building companies. But for me, walking into Plant Grant Sunnyvale, there was a Grigory's on every top rope, and Grigory's are a really expensive belay device that we would save up for forever. And so seeing, 40 of them always blew my mind. I was like, oh, we've arrived. Climbing is a thing now. And yeah, I'm blanking on where I'm going with that, but just it's interesting how much we've changed. And so on that setting note, what was it like setting in some of these early gyms versus now? Like what kind of stayed the same and what has changed drastically?
I mean, I think kind of the fundamentals of climbing always sort of remain the same. Like you're seeking to create opposition between hand and footholds. There's certain inalienable truths of like side poles need kind of these push positions and these sorts of things. So a lot of the like fundamental aspects of climbing, that we were still creating and putting on the wall at those times, like early 2000s. I'm still relying on a lot of those formulas now. I was very lucky to have a lot of um, some really good mentors. One like Moses Potter, for example. He was the head route setter of Planet Granite when I first started there. Actually, no, I take that back. Donnell Humphreys was head route setter, but
Oh no.
Moses was also around as part of that old guard, and the two of them were just incredible mentors and really showed me what like professional route setting was. Versus before that, it was much more of a self expression, or um, you know when you're setting for free, or for exchange for a membership or whatever it is, there's not a lot of accountability. So I think once it transitioned to be an actual job, and you have a boss and there's like production goals and expectations to hit certain grades, uh, that sense of accountability really works to professionalize what we're doing.
So I love that you shout out Moses because he was the guy who hired me when I did a bit of route setting. And I might have shared this on the podcast before. I know we talked about where Moses, when he taught me how to set, how I remember it was this idea of that kind of fundamental of climbing. You have a side pole, so you're looking for some kind of opposition. And what I remember is that there was this idea of teaching climbing by doing that. Maybe teaching is the wrong word, just kind of building up an intuition in climbers by demonstrating basic fundamentals, as in putting a push foot when you have a side pull. And even if you can't visualize that while you're listening, it's just kind of basic movement. But climbing has kind of grown, and now people aren't necessarily going outdoors as much. And I guess I just want to poke on that idea of teaching through setting, and even though that's a climbing fundamental, I mean, we both know that you sometimes get on a climb and it purposefully doesn't have classic opposition. That can be part of the fun, or it can be awkward, and it's a fine line. And just, yeah, and any thoughts on the role that kind of philosophy plays now?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important just to like understand the fundamentals of climbing movement. You kind of have to know the rules in order to know how to break the rules. So, where maybe you're not finding that push foot for the side pull, for example, you may find this like vectored foot that you're going to pull against. You may have some heel hook. There may be some other method to create again like opposition and force against those holds and create stability or allow you to move to the next hold, whatever it is. Um, but but people kind of have to understand what those fundamentals are so that they understand that if they remove this amount of force, they need to then create this other amount of force over here, right? Um, and I think when we do go into, I'm sure we'll get into like forerunning and tweaking climbs and stuff like that, kind of normal commercial route setting talk. Uh, I think the more people gravitate back to a fundamental approach when they're trying to take something from not working well to working better, or to be less successful to successful, um, to kind of rewind and simplify that approach and go to like, oh, maybe they just need a push foot. Maybe this hold is turned a little too much, or whatever it is, but kind of leaning back into the fundamental things. I think it's akin to art school. I was an art major and then later a design major and BFA in design. You don't go to school and you're immediately start freshman year on like a senior thesis that's, Jackson Pollock style throwing paint at the wall. You're going to really start with understanding like the fundamentals of color theory and really basic design principles and still, charcoal figure drawing. Like you really start in a foundational understanding of aesthetics and art and use and manipulation of materials. And then later kind of get this more advanced, the freedom to have a more advanced application of those things. I know setters approaching the craft now, they immediately kind of want to mimic the things they see on Instagram that are flashy and these paddle dynos and all these things, but they're lacking maybe a lot of that fundamental understanding of what makes that thing work the way it works. It's good to be able to play, but I think it's important to really have that foundational understanding.
What's interesting is those kind of extreme moves like paddle dinos, when they first came around, I would say they got a bad rap because people would just try to throw them up on the wall and they would be really awkward and not be so good. But sometimes some of those compy movements, when they're dialed down to accessible grade for someone like me, they actually feel extremely normal and natural. And it's fascinating that there's a fundamentals there, even the showier move. But before we go into paddle dinos, uh, okay, you explained some of those fundamentals of movement, and let's let's connect that to kind of like setting 101. And the reason why it's tricky to even talk about fundamentals of movement is because climbing is so complex, and sometimes things that feel natural, like a paddle dyno, it's almost something we invented, or I shouldn't say we invented. It's something that came into the climbing mind space, not too long ago. And you can say, okay, well, there's drop knees, there's push foots, there's heel hooks, and you said vectored angle on a foot chip, which I assume means almost like a foot that you can pull on to create opposition. Uh, just how do you think about setting 101 when you're talking to new setters about these fundamentals? What are the things you try to instill?
I mean, I think I think there's a lot of tricks, right? And in a very basic sense, when we can try and create whatever we want, whatever we're putting on the wall, that's one thing. But we have to get to the testing phase quickly. So I think a lot of the learning comes from the like physical interaction and testing of the product, and it's teaching skills for how someone can test if the climb is appropriate for a particular demographic of climber, or and that's just kind of a fancy way of saying like on grade, if you will. um, and so encouraging the setter to understand how they're creating stable body position. So we may do like some like subtle hand hovering exercises or foot hovering exercises. You can see someone visibly try. So I think recognizing effort in others, and you can tell when that person's like amping up or ramping up their strength to do this particular move, or when they're like peaking. Being able to recognize that in other climbers, and then make those adjustments. So I think a lot of it is not necessarily teaching them how to put the holds on the wall. It's teaching them how to test if the holds are on the wall in a way that makes sense for those climbers of that assignment or demographic or whatever.
Hmm. Forerunning. Yeah. Yeah. Forerunning.
Or running, exactly.
Forerunning is the practice of trying the climbs after they've been set and well, potentially often tweaking them to get what you're looking for before it's released to the public. I like that concept of doing a hand hover where it shows that there's a body position, there's a stable body position that you're moving through to the next one. But I'm curious when that starts to not be applicable, these kind of things, because maybe that's applicable in the V3, but I don't think there's a lot of hand hovering. Well, I shouldn't say, like V12, like, sometimes you start doing things that you're coming into unstable positions, and this is an impossible question, but just like those different ways of understanding the fundamentals as it climbs up the grades is, yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's experience. I think it's just learning from what worked and what didn't, and what's causing something to be difficult. One of the one of our main limitations I find with newer setters, newer climbers as well, is that they don't necessarily have the depth of language needed to express why they're feeling the thing they're feeling, or express why the climb is difficult, or why they feel off balance. Um, so I think that's one of the main tools that we can try and provide new setters, is to expose them to like really deeper and more evolved language early on in their setting, and challenge them to express things beyond "this is hard" or "awkward" or whatever kind of these like generic catch-all terms are for something not functioning the way we want, or something being inappropriate for a particular audience of climber.
Yeah, it makes me wonder how experienced climbers need to be good setters. I think the reason why Moses tapped me when I was there is because I was one of the stronger climbers in the gym, and he needed someone to forerun to help forerun. And if you've climbed a bunch, you start developing this ability to say, well, there's no push foot, but could I heel hook on the other side? And and looking for things with a broader open mind. And I'm wondering, yeah, when is someone ready to set, or is that the wrong way to think about it?
I mean, that itself has also evolved a lot over the years. I think, that would have been my hiring practice as well, to find this young, talented climber that provides a lot of horsepower to our forerunning team to climb the harder grades. And those people often become amazing setters because they do have this like really evolved and experienced level of understanding climbing movement. That's not a sustainable practice in supplying the I forget how many climbing gyms are in the U.S. Let's call it six or 700 climbing gyms. All of them need multiple route setters. it's just not sustainable to always rely on just the strongest climber in the gym to hand pick them and they become route setters, particularly now that route setting is like a relatively viable career path for a lot of folks. And it also doesn't do maybe the best work in diversifying our setting teams, which is obviously incredibly important as we've continued to diversify the communities that climbing is open to and the community of the kind of tons of different demographics of climber that come into our climbing gyms. We need setting teams that have relatable experience to a lot of those different folks. So what we've done, maybe this kind of diverges into like hiring practices and things like that, and maybe is a little off topic from this original question, but one of the things we've done is really kind of dismantle how we go about hiring route setters. So we've worked to kind of lower the barrier of entry to setting by creating some like really base entry level positions that are like hold washers and forerunners. We try to term those so they're usually like a shorter term of employment, and it allows people to like dip their toe in, learn that what goes into route setting as a profession, which is still largely unknown to a lot of people. From there, they then maybe graduate to an apprentice role where they're doing some basic route setting. They're understanding how to use work at height techniques safely, how to attach hold safely, and then create hopefully a lot of this fundamentals based climbing movement before they then maybe get to graduate to starting to remove and play on the fringes of what's possible from like a physics standpoint, in like you're saying, like creating these like different ways of creating opposition and force. So what that's enabled us to do is really like allow a lot of people to be exposed to the craft. And then when we have full-time or more longer term employment options available, we have a much larger pool of people to choose from, and people that have had an opportunity to show their communication skills, their work ethic. We're really seeking to hire talent and potential over experience and strength. So I think a lot of that has really just evolved over time. It still isn't perfectly calibrated, right? Like maybe you make a post for a head route setter position, maybe it's still challenging to find that perfect person. But it's also because all the expectations of all the roles within a setting team have continued to rise as well. So like everyone's trying to just continue to up their game. And it's demanding to run these diverse teams.
Yeah, there's a professionalism that has been brought for sure. And I got to point out this idea of taking someone who is newer and then putting them through a early kind of apprenticeship probably also accelerates their climbing ability massively. Like I almost wish someone did that for me as a climber. That stuff we talked about around creating fundamental movements, like stable positions. I mean, that's why I try to tell people when they first start climbing. One of my biggest tips to people is make it feel like if you let go of the hand you want to let go, that you're not just going to explode off. Like move your feet, move your body until you feel comfortable, and then let go. And it's just this idea of how you can use what's available to you to find a stable position to move. And so you're probably accelerating their climbing at the same time. And this is something I've often thought about is I really appreciate the time I spent route setting because I think it made me a better climber. It made me also, it made me appreciate beautiful climbs, both indoors and outdoors in a whole different way where you just think, wow, especially outdoors. Why, how did that happen? Like that's just that perfect recycling from a down pull to a undercling pinch now. Like, thank you, Stone, for making that happen.
Yeah, just how rare it is that nature or like organically created this complex climbing sequence, and maybe a consistency of difficulty, particularly in routes. I think are amazing. Like a route that's just like really consistent bottom to top without like big sections of 5.7 in the middle of some 5.13 or whatever. It's just really unique, I think, and amazing to think that that's possible.
That's why there were so many drills that used to get taken out to the crag. But don't do that. Keep your route setting indoors. Uh, I just want to say really quickly about that diversity idea, as well as the the not always needing it to be some 18-year-old who climbs V10 and is 5'8", 140, just with a +4 ape. It's like the typical climber. Is we had this guy. Actually, I'll shout out the guy on the crew, a buddy of mine, Mick Petz, who he's from England, and he just climbed very feet first. And he's a great climber, but I don't know if he's climbed V12 and up, and when he set it, but he could set V12, and it was so different from how we would set V12, who are maybe more used to that grade. And I loved it. Like, I loved his setting because he set with this different viewpoint on style, and it's fun. It's a good idea not to just make it approachable to more demographics that we want to enjoy climbing, but even for the typical 18-year-old kid, that they get exposed to things that maybe, yeah, is new, and that means it's fun.
That's cool. I love that you mentioned that style of climbing. That's probably my preference or go-to style. If I'm trying to set something technical, is that I'm requiring some forethought in your body positioning before you move to the next hold, and less. It's more like proactive and less reactive. So you're not reaching for a hold and then being like, oh gosh, now what do I do? You're kind of getting into a body position or placing your feet to engage the hold that you've gone to. Um, and I think that from a technical standpoint, it requires a lot more forethought from the climber.
Ah, yeah. Shout out, Mick. Good stuff. I love that. Okay, we did a little bit of route setting 101, but you are route setting for the masses, for the thousands and thousands. And so I'm curious, what's kind of like the 101 on that? Like, I'm sure there's a safety element. There's just, what's the kind of experience beyond just putting on the holds and making sure they're stable that you're looking to create, because you have such a broad demographic that you're trying to appeal to?
Well, certainly we have a lot of greater latitude in, we'll call it like risk tolerance, but it's not necessarily risk of injury. It's a little more like risk of falling unexpectedly. As you go up in the grades, obviously the climbers are more comfortable falling. They have a lot of experience falling off the wall. So we have a lot more latitude, I guess, in what we create. As you move down the spectrum, we want to be more cognizant that they may have less experience falling. So we have a lot of like risk mitigation standards that we implement. So in most movement locations, any V2 and under climbs will likely finish lower than the top of the wall, usually around no higher than 12 feet. We also try and taper maybe difficulty towards the top. So we don't want like the penultimate move on the climb to be the crux. We're going to try and like pull the cruxes down a little bit to a more accessible and projectable height where someone can throw their body at it multiple times to learn that lesson or figure out that movement technique without putting themselves at unnecessary risk being higher on the wall. So it becomes a little more of an environment catered to people learning how to climb and not necessarily shutting them down at the very top and making it much harder to kind of to learn and enter that space. So trying to think what else for. I mean, this generic risk mitigation stuff with just like making sure that holds are attached properly and there's not fall hazards and all this stuff, which thankfully is becoming the standard. I think as the industry has matured, but I think really we're just looking at creating challenges that allow people to fail safely and to learn. We really learn through failure, but we're validated by success, and we're trying to create a product that enables people to have the right dose of both. You have to be old school like us, maybe, to go into a gym and really want type 2 fun and to fall all the time. Most people really want to have some success. And I think if we're honest with ourselves as well, like success feels nice. That's what kind of keeps you coming back into the gym as well. So we're really trying to have like a well calibrated experience for all demographics of climbers, where they can find challenges, learning opportunities, uh, uh, an appropriate dose of success for that level. Um, but success for everyone that walks in the door is kind of a necessary thing with how climbing gyms have evolved.
That's interesting. This idea of finding the right dose of success while also finding the right dose of uh, type 2 fun, of failure that is at the right level where you feel like you're making progress. And that's something I want to pick on more, is just this idea of success and teaching and skill building. Because what we a critique that I've heard about American gyms is that they're they're easy, they're just very straightforward, and they lead to a lot of success. And perhaps that's not the best thing to instill in people who want to continue getting better. But you want to see people have success when they're 8-year olds coming in for a birthday party. And so, yeah, how do you think about, how do you guys go about actually practicing the one creating boulders that are both successful and ones that teach and build skill, and ones that are really challenging and more that type 2 fun?
Well, we do try to track what's represented within each grade range in a facility. Most of our gyms apply what we call style characteristics on boulder problems. So we have, what are they? They're going to be a trainer, which is kind of like a predictable experience, or the movement is something familiar. You've hopefully seen it before. Perfect for warming up, perfect for mileage. You're maybe not wanting to be challenged in deciphering really complex beta. You're not trying to like learn some new concept. And then we have skill builders. As the name implies, we're trying to translate a skill that would enable someone to move to the next level in climbing, or to unlock movement possibilities within that demographic of climber. Um, and those things need to be prescribed at a digestible level. So the skill builder element is likely maybe not the crux of the climb, but it's something they encounter along the way. They're like, oh, this is cool. I've learned this heel hook, or I've learned how to toe hook, or uh, whatever it may be. And then a test piece, which is a more, maybe test a particular skill at a really high level for that grade range. Again, still, it doesn't necessarily mean it's sandbagged, but it's testing a particular skill at a high level, or how you can combine a bunch of skills at a relatively high level while on the same climb. So, it may just have like a lot of these different lessons that maybe you've learned through your climbing journey, all thrown at you in the same problem. Um, so by kind of looking and compartmentalizing, if we looked at, let's say, all the V3s to V5s in a gym and the percentages represented in these different styles, you get a sense for the flavor offered in that gym. Uh, and it's actually been somewhat valuable data for us as well. I know I've experienced gyms where maybe there's an influx of critique from the community of the V3s seem too hard, or I'm having trouble breaking into the V5 level. And I can kind of go back, obviously we'll go through and like climb in the gyms and talk to the head setter and see kind of what's going on. But even just looking at those percentages of climbs represented in those three categories, they'll tend to be more in the test piece range. Just means that the experience of the climber is a little elevated if they're climbing exclusively within like that small range of climbs.
Uh, that's freaking cool, Ward. That's really interesting, and I didn't quite know that that's what you guys had going behind the scenes. And let me repeat it back to you some of these categories to make sure I understand. So, an example I'm going to use is that Moses would say, "Hey guys, don't put a undercling on a V0. Like that's not what we're trying to. That's not digestible quite yet." And so then uh, on a V1, if we're doing, say, a skill builder, you might put a undercling on it, but it would be a juggy undercling that's part of the easier part of the route, not the crux. Uh, and and then if you say on a V5, you've introduced heel hooks before, you've introduced underclings, maybe gastones, or maybe a dead point. You put those moves in a row potentially, or maybe even combined, but not at like the highest level, but at a moderately hard level. And then they have to demonstrate proficiency at these different things that they've acquired along the way. And that would be a test piece. Great name, by the way. Excellent name.
Exactly. No, perfect definition. And you can imagine if you're a somewhat newer climber, you've been climbing for a year or something, you're climbing the V3, V2 to V4 range, let's say, you're going to want a higher percentage of climbs that feel comfortable and allow you to experience success. Let's call that the trainer style. Uh, and more climbs that are maybe teaching you things and you're learning about climbing movement. You're just putting a bunch of arrows in your quiver so that when you do get stronger and you learn how to implement all of those techniques, you can then climb harder grades. But you might want to experience less in that test piece range because you're really not looking to be tested so much. And again, there's some generalization, but we're trying to kind of look at these general communities and what we interpret as a climber in that demographic seeking. Granted, everyone's seeking something different. And then in the really higher grades, maybe there's more test pieces, more trainers, but there's obviously less specific skills we can teach a V10 climber, for example, right? They should know how to do everything by now, more or less, and they're just doing it at different levels, and they'll continue to like perfect that technique. But we're not introducing heel hooks to a V10 climber, right? They've already learned these things.
And that totally mimics how I feel like people experience the outdoors, where there's often a climb that kind of allows people to break into a new grade range, but then there's some iconic test piece like Midnight Lightning. We'll just call it V8. I don't know, whatever. We'll call it V8. And that's probably not people's typical first V8, because it really, you have to demonstrate a dead point and a strength on that lightning bolt. You have to demonstrate a hard mantle and demonstrate a mental ability to feel confident up off the ground, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, even from the start, you have to stand on one of the world's first dual text feet, like this the greasiest foot on earth, I think. So
What do you think that was like 20, 40 years ago, 50 years ago? Geez.
yeah, well, it's offset. They were wearing like EBs and stuff, so basically tire rubber on shoes.
Yeah, and no pads. Uh, okay, that's cool. Last question on those categories, which again, I think I actually more than one question. When did those start being implemented?
I think they're still in the phase of being implemented or realized or let's say leveraged to really improve the climbing experience in all of our gyms. Some gyms are really committed to that idea and maybe really bought in or are trying to leverage them. Other gyms maybe newly being exposed to them, and we're continuing to add different brands and gyms into the movement umbrella as well. So there's always going to be like different phases of adoption of those things. We do tag them in Kaya, and most of our, actually, really all of our gyms use Kaya as a platform, at least for our back end. But we don't expect, obviously, every climber in the gym to have a Kaya account and log all their climbs all the time. It's just kind of an unrealistic goal. People just climb for a lot of different reasons. I, I think it's fair to say that we'll try and be more public facing in a lot of these styles. A lot of things that kind of determine if someone has a good positive experience is the predictability of that experience. So like you don't want to go out for pizza and all of a sudden you walk in and they don't even sell pizza, you're eating something else, right? So I think as someone comes into the climbing gym, if we provide more tools for them to self curate and seek potentially seek out the experience that they're wanting, so they try to align the product with what they're wanting from the product, because it maybe has different tags or signs on it or whatever it is. I think we're still trying to like unlock what that looks like, but it does enable the person to at least engage with the climb, with an expectation, right? And hopefully we're meeting that expectation within like a smaller, hitting a little bit smaller target.
Yeah, it's really a cool idea. The only thing I got to point out that just opens up this Pandora's box that is really tricky, where I gave that example of Moses telling us, hey guys, don't put an undercling on a V0. And if you start doing all these skill builder climbs, and you can imagine that you start getting more granular and you say, okay, this is a V5 skill builder, and we're going to expose you to heel hooking and a dead point. And and you guys have determined this is a skill that's appropriate for this level, and this is how we're going to demonstrate. But this is again the tricky thing. Like, we can talk about drop knees, Gastones, heel hooks, but it's almost an unlimited amount of skills in some ways. Like, it seems like you can. It depends how you want to slice and dice it. So, do you guys think you're going to head down that granularity? Because that's going to be tough.
I don't believe so. It's not as prescribed as that, and I think it's just trying to share the conversation we're having as setters while we're creating the product and measuring that product to who we imagine is going to come and try and climb it. We're having all these conversations anyway. So we're having conversations of, is it okay to ask this V4 climber to do this thing? So it's revealing a lot of that conversation and curation that's already happening. And like we were saying before, there's nuance and different appetites and palates represented within each gym. So what may be a skill builder in one gym may not be in another.
Dude, yeah, it's really cool to hear that you guys are making that more just transparent. Those, I totally remember that conversations. It's like, no, dude, this is not a V4 crimp. Like, I don't care what foot you put on. This is just not a climb, or this is not a hold we want to see on a V4. And just the idea of making that more transparent is great, because I think something that I didn't understand before I picked up a wrench is that I thought that setting was more of an exact science. It's like, this foothold has to go in this T nut, and that I shared some of the real experiences I had where it's like, oh, that T nut stripped. We're just putting it in the other T nut, even though, don't tell my boss, because what I should have done was put a tap wrench in and rethread that T nut, but I was lazy. And so just like making all of this more transparent, rather than people think that there is, yeah, that's an exact science, and that communicates the right thing to what the climber should expect. So I applaud that. I think that's really cool, man.
Yeah, we work within a lot of creative constraints all the time. So you talk about like needing to put this foothold in this T nut. We really only need to do that because of the other choices we've made, right? So we've made choices of like the orientation of all the different holds and the hold leading up to that causes you to want that foot there. This hold's bigger, it's turned a different way. It's going to enable you to open up a whole bunch of options of how maybe you don't have to put that foot there. It's kind of one of those main lessons that I think every setter learns eventually, is that they're in complete control, right? So there's nothing that has to go in a particular place. These are all a result of these other choices we've made. We try and keep climbs relatively autonomous from one another. So like holds of different colors aren't touching each other. In most cases, certainly in the gyms that I oversee, because I think aesthetics are particularly important to me. And my team's like pretty on board with those ideas as well. And we try to balance like big features on the wall and really create a landscape that's somewhat pleasing to look at. It's considerate of colorblind climbers and yeah, so all of those different creative constraints enable us to they all guide our choices, and we're going to make better choices when we have less potential choices to make in a lot of cases.
Wow. I can't believe you all consider colorblind climbers and setting things up so that you aren't confusing them. That has come so far along from the early days where aesthetics were definitely not part of the equation. I mean, for one thing, there's just a lack of holds, like this idea that you could, have holds that were the same color. And that also makes me think of this idea of density. And I think we've seen an evolution of less density, more volumes. How, actually, yeah, just can you say more about aesthetics and how you guys lay out the gym to be pleasing?
There's definitely been changing expectations. I think when gyms were smaller and we were taping holds, you would see a really high density of climbs. Maybe they lived on the wall longer. They were certainly more haphazardly created. Like I was saying with the consideration of colorblind climbers, like we look at what hold colors we use in the gyms. We use an app. It's a CV simulator to account for the different types of color blindness, and you can kind of see if you're going to get contrast between the colors, and that kind of helps us determine what color layout is appropriate, and we more or less kind of stick within that same color layout or different variations of it for all the different sets in the gym: rope climbs, boulders, etc. So there's some like basic considerations when it comes to actually putting holds on the wall. We're certainly going to look at the scale of holds. So maybe we're spacing volumes out evenly. Maybe we're clustering them in certain areas and trying to balance it with either negative space or other larger holds. So there's definitely a lot of thought that goes into how to present the product in the most visually appealing way. One of the best things we can do as setters is create something that someone looks at and wants to climb. If the only pleasurable experience comes from actually doing it or touching it, or in the worst case scenario, only being successful on it to feel like you got to enjoy that thing, it's terrible. So we need people to be able to walk in, look across the gym, and be drawn into certain areas. Uh, walk to this wall because they're drawn over to this huge volume cluster, and then look across the gym and they see some other holds in different colors that are arranged in such a way that then draws them over to that area. And we want people to move through the gyms, having that experience and those discovery moments, or being enticed onto different walls or different problems.
Dude, that's so cool. It makes me think of when I first started climbing and I started out the Rocknasium, and this is in the mid 90s, and it had this arch that was 25 feet tall or something. This was like our lead cave. It was like actually had a roof, maybe 28 feet tall. But so for me, the aesthetic there was just like, oh, wow, that's real climbing, going upside down up there. And I love this concept of making climbs that people are interested in indoors, where, if you drive past Bishop and you see them in Dala or something, yeah, of course, it's like a striking array. And to be honest, that all that stuff always pulls people in, but recreating that experience indoors is something I would argue is relatively new, and it impresses me the amount of thought you put into it. And I want to circle back to the fact that you have a degree in art and design. I could be saying that wrong. And there's always been this like kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say this is like an argument in setting, but this idea of like how much is setting art and how much is it design, and just any thoughts on the role of self-expression in setting versus the role of kind of accomplishing a task, kind of how you've been laying it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly artistry in route setting. And we make products all the time, as just people in general make products all the time that some are purely function and some look beautiful. Maybe the UI is really pleasing. What we do as route setters is fundamentally design, because it's really dependent on it being used for a particular outcome by the user, whoever's interacting with it. So, maybe there's very unique moments where we create something that's just for visual appeal. You might see those things on Instagram or something, and they're super cool. They get the community excited about whatever we created. But in essence, actual route setting, like real route setting, is really a design process. So we're trying to create a product for a particular person, or for a group of people. We're trying to capture a certain percentage of people that we think are going to enjoy climbing on this thing. And then we also need to think kind of beyond that in how do we offer a lot of products in the same space that ensure we're capturing all of the people. So, if we, let's just say we have 100 people all climbing on these 10 V6s in the gym. It's unrealistic as setters to think that we're going to be successful at having all 100 people enjoy all 10 V6s. But if we can capture 70, 80 people enjoying 7 or 8 of those 10 V6s, then we're capturing everyone through that process and hopefully not excluding anyone from enjoying the product or finding challenge and finding success and learning the lessons, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, and then it makes me think that aesthetics are part of that design process, almost in the idea of bringing people into the product. Like my wife is a product designer, but more in the software world, and just that idea that it's not about making it beautiful, it's that you want to make it usable, and then the beauty is part of the interaction as well as just that overall experience that draws you in. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I think ugly climbs can certainly function beautifully and teach a lesson, or people find success, so they can still function. Um, but there's just more layers to it, and I think being able to look at the presentation of a facility down to the materials they present grades on, and how they're combining whole different varieties of hold series, but maybe they have a similar like texture or feel. How we're choosing to have someone jump and catch a more comfortable hold versus a sharp hold, and when's that appropriate, when it's not. These are all design and in parallel aesthetic choices also, because you want someone to maybe it's like a physical aesthetics, I'm not sure, but like you want them to be able to like enjoy trying the thing, and even if they fail, you want them to maybe be encouraged that they can try that thing again. um, I think about like the curation of the space in the gym or the wall. Let's say like a bouldering set, you want to appeal from afar, and then you want someone to come closer and be like, "Oh, all the holds on this blue climb are really cool. They look really fun to touch." Uh, but then there may be like little secrets too that are zoomed in a much further level. That's like, "Oh, this one crimp is just blocked with this little thing, and it just creates this cool little moment." Or you have to hold this thundercling in like just a particular way. Those are kind of those like more intimate discoveries as well. So I think it kind of works as you zoom in and as you zoom out, in considering all the different kind of layers of interaction.
Ah, that's sweet, dude. It's like fractal beauty. You're like, you like keep, yeah, you want to be drawn in from afar. And then as you appreciate those little details, and again, I think, and hopefully people listening will get that, as I did more route saying, it made me appreciate those little tiny things like, oh, this crimp is perfect, but it blocks my ring finger and my pinky. So instead of it being a jug, like now it's not. On that idea of making something comfortable and making something fun, there's this thing that we often do where because we're in control of the experience, we make it more comfortable. We say, okay, like how about we don't dyno into a sharp gasto cling because that just doesn't feel good. But then there's this line there of if you set it right, you can sometimes make these awkward movements feel beautiful. You just have to get into the right position. I'm kind of ripping this off from Jamie Emerson, who argues that when we think about star rating, quality rating, and this is outdoor climbing, that he doesn't want to bring movement into the not the gym chain, but the actual act of movement into the equation, because it can be subjective, and what may feel awkward for one person is maybe just the wrong beta, and another person can find the right way. So how do you think about awkward movement and even like the injurious potential that it can have there?
Yeah, I mean, again, like another layer of maybe the aesthetics is considering the human body. So, what positions are you putting the climber in? Does it? We joke of like, if someone takes your picture, do you want them to like share that on the internet? You know, so if you're in this like amazing drop knee and this is like doing this really cool move, or you catch this hold and your feet are flying out behind you, those are amazing moments, and you want the climber to feel cool and to feel like they did something impressive or they feel athletic. Uh, you need to create those moments on the wall as well. So I think that the person interacting with it and the body positions you can encourage or set them up to be in is also part of that consideration. If everything you're like kind of knock knee, double knock, drop knee, and climbing, and you look kind of like really uncomfortable and like unathletic, if you will, it doesn't feel great, right? And I think there's charming moments of that you can create. That's a novelty, but the more you're considering not only the aesthetics of the holds on the wall, but how can the climber move through it. And I think in a more advanced sense, we kind of look at what body positions are you putting the climber in, and then can they elegantly move from that body position to the next body position, because of all the transitions between positions are not comfortable, or make sense, or can be done in a fluid way, then it's interrupting that experience as well, like the record skipping or something, right? uh, like one of the lessons I try to instill in a lot of newer setters is just kind of removing, obviously, maybe a hot take, but like foot switching's clearly a skill to learn how to match feet on a tiny foothold. I get it. But it's one of the main interrupters in like a flow of climbing movement. So I think if you're able to provide these like walkthrough feet, it allows the climber to move from one position to another without that little hiccup. It's akin to maybe walking up a flight of stairs and then you just pick a random stair and put 2 feet on it. It kind of interrupts that flow. I find foot switching is kind of the same thing. Not that it can't be an amazing experience on a slab and like the thing you're most excited to have done. But if you want the climb to kind of flow, I think building in those transitions. So how do they maybe grab an intermediate hold that only allows them to walk their feet and then they latch the hold they're meant to move from? I think that's where like this technical aspect and flow and usability of the climb comes in.
That was definitely some route setting 102 idea right there of using an intermediate to walk your feet through to then get to the next hold. Uh, God, I freaking love route setting. Just this idea you're talking about you create a look, you have to create feelings in these positions on the wall. Like there really is just this broad creative aspect that is really fun and really complex, and you're really creating an experience, like a visceral experience, from the vision all the way to the feeling, and that's why people fall in love with this stuff. And yeah, I guess we're kind of squarely into route setting 102. So I guess I want to ask you what you think makes a good climb. I mean, we've talked about a bunch of those elements. What do you think makes a good climb? And maybe we can borrow that from some of your favorite climbs outdoors that other people might be familiar with, so that they might go, oh, like now I get why Ward's talking what he's talking about, because I've been on that climb too, and that move is sick.
Gosh, that's hard. I mean, I try and resist relating outdoor climbing to the indoor experience and the idea of quality. I think so much of what makes like an amazing climb outdoors is it's in its environment. It's part of like how you arrive there. It's legacy of first ascensionist and when the route was put up. It's like so many other factors I think that play into like quality outdoor climbing. Um, Gosh, I think quality is always going to be singular to the person experiencing it. What makes an amazing climb for one person is not an amazing climb for another. For me, I like to play on the fringes of. I think as a creative, we want to be on the fringe, right? So we want to be exploring new movement. We want to be testing a climber just to the edge of what they're capable of doing or comprehending within a particular grade range. So what's amazing quality for me is when you're able to introduce some movement concept or something that the climber has maybe never experienced before, but you've done it in a way that allows them to organically unlock and discover whatever lesson you're trying to teach or movement style you want out of them. So to me, that's kind of what is like most appealing or what I get most excited about in both climbing um, and in creating as a route setter is those like discovery moments for people when they're not able to like necessarily predict this like sequence, and it's less, maybe it's even less about sequencing and it's more about just discovering how to move through a space.
Yeah, I will echo those moments where you just kind of stumble into a body position. I want to say stumble in that it's the route, whether it was the route setter or outdoors, just kind of it lends itself to some drop knee that sucks you into the wall, and you just feel so secure and you get all stretched out. It makes you feel athletic. You want it on your Instagram. And I love those moments where and I'll say a indoor climb, it just forces is the wrong word. A good climb doesn't force you to do anything. A good climb leads you into it gracefully, and then you do some magical toe hook and you have never thought about it, but your foot just went there and it just made it all not just possible, but feel good. And those moments are special to me as well.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, it speaks to like the power of language. We were talking about language earlier. It was very, very common when you and I first started route setting to use phrases like, "Oh, I want to force this move. How do I force this move?" Whatever force was like such a common part of our vernacular around route setting. And now, like, we honestly try and really never use that term. We're using terms like encourage or entice, but we're really not even using the concept of forcing. I think as soon as we're forcing the person to do a particular thing, no one wants to be forced to do anything. Um, so I think the more we just think about encouraging, then it's giving. So it's us giving them the tools they need to do the thing we want them to do. Where forcing it often seems like a limiting their options. So we're removing their ability to do anything other than the thing that we wanted them to do. So it's a little bit of a different approach, but I think just in general that there's a lot of power in that language, and when you're teaching new setters, the sooner you can kind of just switch their mind from thinking about forcing movement to encouraging movement. They just tend to solve problems in a much different way.
Yeah, language does matter. Uh, you said something about not comparing indoor climbing and outdoor climbing, and I just want to dive in there a little bit more. You told me about some of these categories, skill builders, and an idea of where success and teaching fit on the spectrum of the experiences you hope people have when they come through the movement doors. What is the relationship to outdoors in either grades or the setting you guys do today?
Wow, it's so hard. I think every climbing area has its different interpretation of grades, so there's no universal truth. So I think it's important to maybe start with an understanding there. Obviously, most people probably listen to your podcast understand that climbing grades vary. They vary on your strengths and weaknesses, the area you're in, the conditions, all of the above. So we're never really going to have that parallel experience in indoor climbing. I think what we do get to bring in is our personal experiences with climbing outdoors. So it's where it's not relevant, and I'm not trying to make a 12A in one of my gyms match a 12A at the new or a 12A in Yosemite. Uh, I can't remove that from my experience. So it is part of that conversation, but as is, it's part of the conversation of the the new route setter that's never climbed outdoors at all, or the other route setter on the team that has like a lot of trad climbing experience, or is exclusively a boulderer and is now weighing in on route grades. Like we all are bringing those different experiences to the conversation. But I think in the idea of finding any kind of calibration between the two, it's not really a realistic goal for us as setters. Um, I like to think we're going to be in the ballpark, uh, but I think we're often in the ballpark it, if what you did outside was equivalent. And I mean that like if we put pieces of tape on every hold you grab outside, that might be more similar to climbing indoors where you just know what to grab. There's not a bunch of confusing things on the wall. I think, if you've climbed in areas like the red, there's a lot of routes that, people hang dog and chalk every little thing that they can reach, and they hang dog the next bolt and they chalk every little thing they can reach. And it's really hard to like decipher the sequence and make choices of what to grab. We don't often have that experience inside, so it's not going to be parallel in that sense. Just think there's a lot of things that go into grading and go into climbing. Most of us will have some outdoor experience. Certainly, every setter has at least an indoor climbing experience. We're all bringing all of those experiences to the conversation, but there's no universal truth of a particular grade.
Yeah, it doesn't relate quite as one to one as people might hope. But with that said, there's also people who sometimes really excel outdoors compared to indoors, and I feel like we more typically hear the story of people who go outdoors and they climb V6 in the gym and then they struggle on a V2. And gosh, I can think of this V1 initial friction in Yosemite that's a V1, but good luck. It's it's no joke. And yeah, but some people do find the other way around, and so I just think it's good to understand that, and it's also fun to try to understand the relation and have that ballpark because I think it gets deeper into the root of what climbing is and what these fundamentals are. And just like I was talking about how Moses encouraged us to not put an undercling on a V0, that doesn't mean that you will never see an undercling on a V0 outside. And it just helps us understand like what is expected of us as climbers. And there's no right answers here, but I always think it's fun to explore because yeah, I mean, it's our sport. Uh, on that topic of grades, how do you guys think about the top level of grades you set in the gym, and do you guys ever have a V15 in the gym? I mean, I know there's not a ton of V15 climbers, but what role do hard grades play in commercial setting?
But I, I think again, kind of back to this idea of capturing the attention of everyone that comes through the door of your gym as being important. So it's certainly important that we provide product for the most elite climbers that will come through. We don't, no climbing gym, at least none of ours, seek to be only available for novice climbers. So we're definitely going to try and have product available for those people, but it will be proportioned maybe with how many of those people exist within the community. So that, maybe some of our gyms in Colorado may have a higher percentage of double digit boulder problems or 513, 514 routes than one of our gyms in an area where maybe outdoor climbing is less prevalent. A lot of the climbers maybe that come through the door are newer, that type of thing. As far as like for the creation of it, obviously we're not likely to task a newer setter that climbs V5 with setting like a V13 boulder problem and expect that climb turns out amazing, right? So we're going to try and task those climbs specifically for people that we believe will deliver the product at a high level, or partner them through the forerunning process with people that can help translate that movement into something that makes sense. One thing that I think is important for just climbers in general to understand is all route setters have positive intent. So we're coming in, we're trying to do a service, we're trying to do the best job we can. That no one, we're not intentionally trying to sandbag something or make something impossible. We're going into it with all of the best intentions. When it comes to obviously setting V14, V13, whatever boulder problems, maybe no one on the team climbs that hard. It's very possible no one's ever touched an outdoor V13, but we're trying to create this thing. And we're going to be trying to create it within a very limited amount of time in a lot of cases. So we're going to be using a lot of tricks in our repertoire, like maybe the hold scaled up and we're holding body positions and we're imagining or we're creating momentum towards holds, and we can like cheat in from a jug and then catch that position. Like there's ways of making it more digestible and to fit within kind of that normal workflow of the day, knowing that the next day you're coming in, maybe you're putting up routes the next day as well. So all of that has to be kind of considered within context. But yeah, every gym's going to have, or our goal is for every gym to have product that's for every level of climber that comes to the door, for sure.
Yeah, totally makes sense why it's not easy to toss up a bunch of V13 and up boulders in a place where it may seem little to no traffic. And I know how hard it is to set a V13 compared to a V8, in the sense that one little tweak might make that V13 V11 and it might make it V15 or not go. And having to forerun it in the middle of your week too, always tricky. I think the reason why I ask about it and the reason why I poke on it a little bit is when I started climbing, I think in my gym, Rocknasium, back in the day, we didn't really have V grades, but probably the hardest thing we saw was maybe a V5 or a V6. And as a result, not as a result, but one of the implications of that is that people kind of climbed V5, V6. And I remember being jealous of when walking into Sunnyvale and seeing these kids have V11s and V12s. And then you would see kids who would climb V11 and V12 And always made me wonder, well, what if that was a V13? What if it was a V16? And I always just, I think that we rise to the ceiling that we see in front of us, and then a few special people bust through, but it's tough to be that special one. And I always just encourage, I just would love to see more of it. And one of the most popular Instagram posts I ever did was a clip of Zach Gala talking about this goldfish idea where we were restricted to our goldfish bowl. And this is why I often do say, go move to a place with a bunch of strong climbers. If you want to climb V15, how many V15 climbers are you climbing around? And it's just my subtle nudge to you guys to see if we can get more hard routes in the gym, even though I know the actual ROI is difficult to quantify.
Yeah, I think you have to be, there has to be something in the gym that's just purely aspirational for people. And, for a V4 climber, that may be V6. But there needs to be something that's aspirational for everyone, but yet still appealing and makes sense and encourages people to, it feels like there's an access point.
Yeah. And this gets back to that earlier idea of success too. And I wanted to touch on that again, because you told me that you had spent some time in Japan setting, and we talked a little bit about the culture there and whether it was more type 2 fun oriented. And I just wanted to touch on that. What you saw might have been different in the community there, and thus the setting and the culture that the setters are trying to set for over there.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to sit a little bit in Austria and in Japan as well. I think what sticks out in my memory of Japan was one, grades. Obviously, people are legendarily hard in Japan, so it was not common for me to go into a gym and be like, heavily challenged at like a V5 level or something. And certainly in Japan, it was, could be very, very hard. But I think it was just the culture around climbing. So I would see people try the same V3 20 times in a row. And they were trying it to understand the movement and to perfect it and to climb it as efficiently as possible. So it was really just dedication to the process of learning, or that process, pursuit of mastery. Um, that seems like it's lacking a little bit in the U.S. I think we're a little bit more of a consumerist culture, and again, like we put some emphasis on making sure there's success opportunities, but maybe there's less of that in Japan, and people really embrace again, like learning through failure and the process of mastery versus needing like validation of their skill set. Um, Obviously, setting in Japan's was super fun. Amazing people, incredibly welcoming. Also, very hungry just to learn and to pick your brain. Even I'm there looking up to Japanese setters, and there's Japanese setters uh, wanting to know everything about how I think about setting, because they're just looking to broaden their the lens in which they're viewing climbing and route setting through constantly.
Yeah, it's just cool to hear what other cultures are like. And it makes me think of how when someone can't get a climb, maybe I'd set some climb and people would say, that's hard for V4. There was a lot of complaints towards us as setters versus recognizing that perhaps in certain instances it was a lack in the climber's ability or their creativeness, and that maybe their unhappiness should be targeted at the climb itself rather than the person who set the climb, because we all know that when you go outside, or if you were competing, you don't get to, you can complain all you want, but you're yelling into the wind. And so I just think I I think it's okay to have success be a metric, because we all should have fun. And it's only a certain type of person that can be miserable and not have success for years on end and still enjoy the process. And, that's why most of us don't project climbs for 50 sessions. That's a specific kind of person. And so balancing that is just, I don't know, man, it's just cool to hear about. I appreciate it.
Yeah, these people are coming into your gym, paying money to be there, right? Like they chose to come through the doors. They chose to pay for a membership. I don't think it's intentionally creating a bunch of soft graded ladders just so that they can say that they climbed a particular grade, but it does need to be part of that conversation of like, why are we creating this thing, and with the mentality or the value system that we're injecting into setting it has to be calibrated to that community, and it has to be we have to consider that people are paying money to do this. They're choosing to spend time in our facilities, and it's just incredibly important to have that be part of the conversation.
And that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning about you guys crafting an experience potentially for the entire climber's experience over their life of being a climber. And for some people, that may be 6 months, but even at 15 years, there are going to be climbers who have never set foot outside that gym. And I just think that's mind blowing, and they can be hooked entirely from what you all create. And so, just emphasizing that, I think that's that professionalism lens that you're bringing, and has probably evolved over the years. Is that you're creating a product and having I'm gonna say empathy because your sweater says empathy, and recognizing that just because you don't like slopers or crimps doesn't mean that when you set that matters, because you're not setting some test piece for yourself. You're creating, you're helping craft an experience for others. And yeah, I think that professionalism is a big evolution compared to 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, it's huge, and I think we're still on that journey, um, both in how we, let's say, I wouldn't want to get on the subject too much, but in the pay and compensation side and worker safety, certainly all of our tools are professionalizing. Our approach to setting is professionalizing. How we build and diversify and train and mentor our teams. All of that is evolving. But we have definitely not finished that process. Uh, but it's come so far in what we were calling, like, again, this like first generation. Uh, it's kind of mind boggling that it's advanced so much.
Yeah, worker safety. I remember throwing drills to people that were on ropes, and none of us had helmets or anything, and we just hucked this sharp, heavy thing. And I remember my buddy Fernando, actually, rest in peace, Fernando Mota, just kind of jumping around on the ladder, like he could move the ladder from one boulder to another. And yeah, no eyeglasses, no helmets. I'm glad to see that it's professionalized, which was a tough sell for all of us. I don't want to wear a helmet. What do you mean wear a helmet? But it's dangerous. I think that's probably a really welcome uh, evolution for the younger generation. And that brings me to this question of, you've seen this evolution. We've seen safety. We've seen hold buys. Like, where do you think it's heading? I know that all the work hasn't been done, and you're still on the forefront by being the first generation. But what do you see in the next 20 years happening?
Um, I mean, it's a great question. I do some work with the CWA, the Climbing Wall Association. I sit on their route setter committee. We're currently in the process of rolling out commercial route setting courses, um, really targeting curriculum for entering the craft of setting, and setting in a safe way within a facility. So it's everything from work at height, but also hold attachment and all these kind of basics of route setting. But future plans are to expand that into team management and communication skills, and giving people the tools and maybe an associated certification to validate their skills to enable them to get head route setter jobs or experience greater pay or advancement within the craft. So all that is still being rolled out. We're doing some pilots of that program. We did one at the most recent CWA conference. We did one recently in New Jersey. So those are still kind of being put into play, but it's a largely untapped and needed resource within the industry. And USA Climbing teaches some clinics and levels, but it's very specific to that competition track, and it doesn't necessarily address the needs of commercial route setters or how maybe an entire chain or organization can have a roadmap for how a setter can develop these skills and advance through an organization and then have that be transferable to maybe another organization or validated in that way. I know when I go to hire setters, people very generically just want to list the amount of years they've been setting, but there's not a lot of context to that. So I don't know who their mentor was. I don't know if that's 1 day a week part-time setting they did for free. I don't know if that's full-time setting at a very reputable gym with amazing mentorship. There's not a baseline. So I think with these certifications, we're trying to move to baselines. I think it's obviously there'll continue to be improvements in workplace safety, stuff like our work at height practices. I think you can peruse Instagram all the time and still see people doing things that are maybe a little bit questionable, standing on tops of ladders, not using safety glasses, questionable work at height techniques. Everyone should know there's a better way now, but we're still on that journey for it to be more commonly adopted or not seen as a point of pride that you're not doing those things. So I think culture will change. I think as we've diversified setting teams and lowered barriers of entry for people to be setters, it's placing new challenges into the process. I think if you're as like a team leader or head setter, you're having to learn how to communicate with a much broader and more diverse group of people and make sure everyone is feeling heard and finding common language and ways to talk about climbing. All of those things are continuing to advance. So I think what we ask of our setters, particularly those in leadership roles, that's the area that's growing maybe the fastest. And I think as we continue to move down that journey, setters in general and the craftsmanship and artistry and importance, you've spoken many times about, we may be everything someone experiences related to climbing may happen within those four doors or four walls. They're created by someone on that team or that team. That's incredibly powerful and important. And I think we'll continue to elevate awareness of that importance, both within like the community or gym owners or management, and position those people as really ambassadors of climbing and of the craft of route setting.
I love the idea of elevating the setters themselves that have dedicated decades to the craft and can say, "Oh, this was a award, Testpiece. Well, of course, it was a banger." And just having that almost celebrity that that even happens outdoors, where it's like, "Oh yeah, like of course this is a wrong calc rig. Like only he would have had the foresight to go up this crazy slab or something." So I think that's really cool, and I'd love to see more of that. On that idea of the future and the evolution, because you have such boots on the ground, and although it's not exactly route setting, what do you think we might see in volumes and holds in the future, other than the idea of the insets into volumes, which I hope someone took a note and is now going to bring back insets, and what was old can be new again.
Yeah, me too, me too. Um, Materials are changing. I think we're looking more at sustainability. Uh, I would personally like to see incorporating ways of like hauling materials. So as we're like setting on lifts or ropes, are there engineered and designed ways of moving these materials around or attaching or detaching them safely from the wall? I think that's part of like that design and material process, making materials strong but lighter, so that people are able to, as setters, move them around without either putting themselves at danger or having to strain their bodies beyond maybe what's reasonable. Um, I love how three dimensional climbing has become with the popularity of large scale volumes and flatter climbing walls, maybe that allow for the placement of these large volumes. We're going to reach a point where maybe the engineering it isn't there, and it's questionable in the amount of leverage we have on these different objects. But I love where that's going, and just creating like really three dimensional spaces, and allowing us to like, again, this is the only climbing they know. If someone's climbed on that same wall for 15 years, it's going to feel stale no matter what we do to it. So the more we inject the facility with new holds, new materials, more three-dimensional materials, things that allow us to stack other things on top of things, it really creates a lot more variety of experience and keeps, again, people interested and engaged and coming through the door wanting to know what's new on the walls.
Yeah, I'll never forget going to Kalymnos with some friends who hadn't really climbed on limestone before. And I was like, hey, like, look behind you. You have a no hands rest if you stem out on that big stalactite. Like, and it's like, oh, I never even thought to look over there and to use that. And so bringing that three-dimensional movement is really cool. I, I know I'm not looking for specific numbers here, maybe just ballpark. Can you share how much money goes into holds and volumes and everything? Like I think that people might be surprised. I just was buying a bunch of holds for my home wall for my kids. And I was like, oh yeah, holds are expensive. I just think it people might not understand the how big a part of the gym a hold buys and volumes are.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, I think us as an organization, this past year, just in revamping hold and volume materials for our gyms, was in the ballpark of 1.2, 1.4 million. So it's a huge investment of money. I think at the local level per gym, it's going to vary quite a bit based on age of facility and the size, also. Um, but yeah, you should be spending 60, 70, 80,000 maybe a year within a gym, to really have that same impact. These things don't last forever. So they're going to lose texture. They're going to get damaged. They're not going to have the same quality of experience, for offer the same quality of experience for the climber if they're really old. And things tend to feel stale if you've climbed on the same hold for 10 years. So there, what we try to do is look at the total volume of holds and materials in the gym and apply a budget that allows us to replace those at the cadence that we expect them to be reaching the end of their life cycle. And it's obviously just guesses because some things last forever, and other things deteriorate very quickly, but we're looking for like averages there.
Gosh, that's a bunch of money going into holds. It's so cool. I just want to shout out. I have a friend who is part of a company that does retexturing of holds. I can't remember what the name of the hold company is, but just kind of on that sustainability idea of trying to revive old holds instead of just toss them all in the trash. I just wanted to give a little shout out there, which I think is cool. Um, this is, I'm kind of curious what you think of board climbing as an experienced setter. You know, like, or do you feel like that's a creative constraint that's kind of cool, or does it kind of seem antithetical to making like big beautiful lines with less constraints? Like, when you saw these standardized boards come around, how did it make you feel as a setter?
I mean, I love that idea. I'm good friends with a lot of the folks at Kilter. Will Anglin grew up as a youth comp kid at our Rockville facility. So when I joined what was then Earth Treks, now Movement, back in like 2000, I would say like nine, Will was around as just like a little Grom uh, kid. Now owns Tension. A lot of those holds that he was shaping in wood and kind of that were the seeds that became Tension climbing. He was creating those and putting them on the wall, like in the gym, and testing them and playing with them. So I'm certainly like in support of that whole process, and I think it offers. We spoke a little to how laborious creating double-digit boulder problems in the gym is. Um, this immediately creates a somewhat limitless resource for climbers that want to climb hard grades. They can just flip through the app catalog of climbs and find whatever they want to climb. So for me as a setter, it takes a ton of that need and pressure off and gives them a place where they can go and climb outside of maybe the more commercial sets, or if maybe there's a lull, we're not meeting their needs there. There's a huge resource and catalog of climbs with really any of those board options. So I think it's amazing. Um, there's also maybe an untapped thing in there where if maybe I climb a V6 on a board, can we use that to calibrate grades across facilities or train people on good climbing movement because they've climbed this thing that we've said this is like a really amazing V2 or this is a really amazing V8 experience, regardless maybe of what it's graded in the app. This would enable us to like have speak a common language in a controllable sort of laboratory experience or environment. Um, just really interesting concept that maybe hasn't been leveraged at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. And yeah, shout out to Will Engelin. He was the one who put us in touch to say, hey, like you guys should do a pod too. And also Kilter has always been, great friends and really welcoming to me. Love everything those people are doing. Yeah, I like that idea of having a shared language in general. But I can see how some people might see it as stifling, in as a route setter, and there's even been a push towards standardized walls. And I know Welltopia has done some work in it. I know Entrepreneur has done some work in it. And yeah, have you guys encountered any of that, or any thoughts on if wall, like, is that something that we'll see in 2040?
Uh, we will see it, and it exists currently, and we'll see it probably tested in some gyms. I don't believe any of our gyms are testing that product. Uh, I agree. I think it's a step too far in homogenizing an experience. I do. There's some economy of scale thing happening in there, and some quality thing where, let's say I set just incredible V2, and it's everyone in the community loves it. People are coming up to me telling me how incredible this V2 experience is. Uh, why not try and duplicate that or catalog or share that or use that as a building block to teach another climber what may go into creating something that's successful. So there's something sticky in there with this idea of repetition that I don't believe has really been explored. But the idea of actually homogenizing or standardizing climbing walls or climbing holes that just light up, but in like more of a commercial environment, off the board terrain, certainly not a fan of. I was a speaker at WIX, the World Indoor Climbing Summit, a few years ago in Bulgaria, and got to experience climbing on the harmonized wall system there. Again, we need people innovating and iterating on these concepts and pushing the boundaries and exploring what commercial climbing or climbing in general can become. But yeah, I don't know that that's going to be the stickiest of concepts at the moment.
That's cool. I just like picking your brain on it because I always enjoy trying to see where we've been and see where we might go. And it's always been something that's a little interesting to me in that exact concept where it's like, oh, this was a banger set by Ward and it outlives, maybe you retire. And it's like, oh, but we're still climbing on those bangers that you set. And so it's always been something kind of interesting to me, but it also, just like you're saying, you can't totally compare different communities, like the demands of a local community and what they're looking for. If you're have a gym right outside the Frankenura and everything is pockets, it just it has to have its own local vibe, or it should. And you might actually take away something by removing that. But I have no idea. I just like I don't know, man. Just thinking about the future. Who knows what could happen? So well, let's wrap a little bit on some advice for setters that are coming up and advice for setters that are experienced. You've been both, you oversee both, and what are some of the common mistakes or advice you could give to people who are just starting their career or ones who have been in it for a long time?
I think one of the best attributes in general is just being adaptable. Uh, and I think part of being adaptable is understanding what you're adapting to. So it's understanding, again, those creative constraints, the limitations of the climbers you're trying to set for, uh, and adapting to that assignment or changing condition. That kind of is akin to what we're talking about with like where you have to put a foot. It only has to go, the foot has to go there because of the orientation of the hands. Um, the more adaptable we are in adjusting our goals and our sense of success, adjusting that to those changing circumstances, the better. I think early on in people's setting, they're looking to share what they think about the climb uh, all the time. And I think as you mature as a setter, and what's important for you to become a better setter is to be really proactive in seeking the opinion of someone else. You don't necessarily always need to rely on your interpretation of quality. The more you can seek the opinion of another person or watch other people climb on the things you've created, the broader lens you're going to be able to view quality through, or through the success of your creation of this product. Um, I also, again, look at language. So basically, your depth of vocabulary and language around route setting really determines the minutia and the nuance that you can, to which you can describe what's successful or what's functioning or not functioning, or within this grade range or not. All of that comes from having a broad and elevated vocabulary or language to describe the work. We do a lot of techniques around like percentages of weight on different body parts and describing climbs as like front wheel drive or rear wheel drive or all wheel drive, like or is the essence of the climb the focus on like your upper body, your lower body, or is it like a whole body situation? I think the more common terms we can find in language in a route setting team, and the more you rely on those tools to address the specific thing you're trying to change or to have function at a higher level, that that's the key. But it comes down to the setter themselves being very dedicated in learning and applying that knowledge or applying that language to their descriptions of the climb. All of us have sat with people that are like, they hop down and they say, "Oh, it's too hard," or they hop down and they're like, "Oh, it's awkward." These are not constructive descriptions of what happened. Describing it like where your center of gravity is compared to your hands, or how much pressure's on this hand or this foot that doesn't allow you to move this body part. That begins to drill down into why the thing is functioning or not functioning, and allows then the setter to have more information and can adapt.
Yeah, that's the worst. This is the worst thing ever when someone is forerunning. They're like, "Oh no, that just feels awkward," and you're like, "What do you mean? Like, what does that mean? Like, so should I change it? Is it a foot?" And yeah, I mean, but Lord, it takes a lot of understanding of movement and climbing to be able to develop that language, and I think that's why people are so interested in route setting, because you have to really deeply understand body. And actually, I shouldn't say just deeply understand and then articulate, abstract, and say, what's going on here? What's going wrong? What could be done better? Because not only you might even understand why something is awkward, and you might even be able to say, like, there's, that foot was too high, but then sometimes it's really hard to correct it. I mean, I guess in my example, you would lower the foot, but it's hard to then say, okay, it's awkward because of this, but how do I make that unawkward? And then within the creative constraint of saying there's only 3 T-nuts over here, what do I do? Maybe I need to change the hand I'm coming off of. And you know, I encourage everyone who's listening to now look at climbs and try to understand what the route setter was thinking. Like, I often am able to probably flash or on-site better indoors because of my time as a route setter, because I see an undercling. I'm like, oh, I know what they're looking for here. Like, it must be a foot right there. And you can almost just, when you get on these well set routes, it's so easy to flow, like you were talking about. You can like intuit what that setter was trying to get you to do. And yeah, that's a good advice. Maybe takes a lifetime to implement, though, Warden.
Well, yeah, and I think that's that's for sure the case, and it's why I'm still so interested in route setting. Like I spent a lot of time in Zoom calls, and I'm writing SOPs or coming up with budgets for operations and these types of things. But the thing I'm still most passionate about is putting holes on the wall and exploring climbing movement and having these like incredibly rich conversations with team members about what they're experiencing on the wall, or talking to the climbers in the gym about what their experiences they're seeking. Um, you know, it's I've said all along, if I had to choose between climbing or route setting, for me, I would choose route setting. Just love that
Wow.
entire process of creating and then watching others enjoy, hopefully, or at least interact with the thing that I've created. I just love that whole process.
Okay, I got to geek out on one more little nitty gritty detail on climbs. Is it good for climbs to be consistent, i.e., that each move is roughly the same grade? I mean, clearly, when there's a crux, it's like the hardest move on a climb. How do you think about where to put the crux, how consistent to make it, or kind of like should it build or go down in difficulty? Like, a V5 might have V5 as the first move, and then it goes V4 move, V3 move, V2. I don't know, I'm just making things up. Like, any thoughts on what makes a climb the most fun, or so, what begets the most success, maybe?
I think everyone wants all of those experiences to happen in the right moment. Um, for me, I kind of like the harder top. I like kind of earning the experience. I've never been the strongest climber in the gym. Uh, so I'm not looking for like the singular super hard crux move. I really like the whole journey of unlocking the puzzle and finding solutions and learning how I can use my entire body to solve the puzzle as efficiently as possible, and being rewarded for keeping it together and linking that whole consistent experience. So for me, that's what I seek most of the time. Um, but everyone's going to want a different experience on the wall. Um, and I think when we are you're trying to learn again, we're not looking for those learning moments to be also our most challenging moments. Um, I think we haven't talked about like route setting much. We've talked maybe more in the context of bouldering. I think of routes as like rhythmic, and it's okay if you have this like very steady cadence of climbing. That's a very flowy, rhythmic experience, but it's also okay if it's maybe fast, 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 and then you rest and you pause and you unlock this next sequence in your head, and then you attack it with this plan, and then you get to another rest, and you have this like varied experience that maybe goes quickly and then pauses and quickly and pauses. Uh, all of those things happen outdoors as well, and it creates that in gym variety when we take different approaches to different product, even within obviously those same grade ranges.
All right, you're right, Ward. It's not just one route. It's that you want all of those experiences at the right time in the right way, versus just there's not one good route. And that's, or route or boulder. That's what's interesting is when you look at iconic climbs, you will often see, oh, it's a one move dyno. You're like, well, is that cool? It's like, well, it that one is kind of cool and special. And then there's climbs where you're like, I don't know where the crux is, and every time I go, I fall one move further, and it just builds and builds and builds, and that's a joy in itself. And then I think it's interesting to think about routes themselves and what makes them different, and this idea of indoor routes are a bit shorter. And how do you think about resting on indoor routes? Like, do you try not to let indoor routes have any big rest because it's 15 meters versus 40 meters?
I mean, I think it's totally okay to rest in indoor climbing. Uh, I think it creates a moment for the climber to assess where they are on the wall, to assess what they're going to do next. I would say when I implement that type of experience, so they climb up some resistance climbing, they get to this rest position, they're a little pumped. I like them to not fully rest, so maybe it's like they're choosing how long to rest at that position, so there's some timing element, uh, and then maybe hit them with the crux right after. And I think what that does is it like challenges them to rest at the perfect amount that they've recovered enough they can still execute, but then they've lost it, and then they have to keep it together to the top. I think if you rest and then it's just easy, um, we've lost something to that experience. You want that like to, if they've been on the route before, maybe they're anticipating that to be the crux. You want that like you want them to be able to stay on the wall and feel that anticipation. Um, Maybe the anxiety to move forward from that stance. I think those are all just great ways to think about building the experience on the wall, but it has to come from the setter and then be actually created. So and then the crux has to be just right, and the rest has to be just right. So it's all just these like very fine calibrations of experience.
Isn't that wild that you're talking about setting up the conditions to have that experience on the wall, that anticipation? You get through a lower crux, you get to the rest, but then you have that outro boulder problem that's pretty stopper for you, and you sit there and you start stressing out. You start going like, oh, like I don't want to blow it. I made it through that lower thing. Like I just need to do this one, and then you're rested, but you kind of like don't want to leave quite yet because you haven't gotten your head on right to turn it up a notch and pull it off. It's just, again, man, very cool how varied what the actual product of route setting, uh, product being the experience that it creates in users. And I love that you think about it in that professional style, but it doesn't, it's visceral from my standpoint, the climber standpoint. And I love deconstructing and understanding the abstraction of these things. But then when it comes together, it's like, it's those moments, that are really enjoyable and fun, and sometimes have stuck with me through my whole life. I remember the first time I was in the Rocknasium and I pulled up onto the roof for the first time and was on big jugs and just felt the air beneath my back and was scared to make a clip. And you're creating these moments of people's lives, even though it's indoors.
Yeah, and I think we want the climber to be engaged, but they also just need to have some awareness in those moments. If I think about like memorable outdoor climbing moments, there's certainly like moves and things that are meaningful, but I also kind of reflect on like, oh, this really cool knee bar, or I remember, there's what was it at the there's climbs at the Red and other places where maybe you like crawl your whole body into a slot. Like these are just like, incredibly unique moments that are just as distinct as clipping the chains, or they're just as distinct as this particular crux move or sequence. Um, so yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to set in a way that removes uh, that element from climbing.
Yeah, yeah, well said. I love those moments. Um, okay, Ward, my last question for you is, how do you go from good to great in life, route setting, climbing? Your pick.
Uh, and like I think maybe it applies to all. There's a design concept or process of design called failing faster. This was something that I'll shout out Brandon Conaway, our head route setter of our Portland movement location. Something him and I have talked in depth about, and worked on to incorporate into like forerunning practices and things. But it's the idea to test the validity of the idea as soon as possible, right? So you're trying to get as many data points and as much information about the thing uh, as early in the process as possible, so you don't go down dead ends, or so that you can begin to make those changes that impact maybe what the end result is going to be. So for me, it's this idea of failing faster, or maybe in a climbing sense, it's analyzing in your own climbing why you were unsuccessful. So not just throwing yourself at the thing, but trying to really dig down and decipher, why was I not successful in this moment? Um, but go to that analytic place as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's powerful because we only have a finite amount of time and resources and willpower. And so the sooner whatever kind of test you can run to know if you're on a dead end is so much better. Like you want to know now if it's just a dead end, because otherwise you waste your time. And I guess you could make some argument it's never a waste of time. You're building a skill, but really, like, you want to know as soon as possible if this is a dead end. And yeah, I like it, man.
Yeah, and holds and materials tend to get bigger on the wall and take up a lot of space, visual space and physical space. Uh, we need to know if they're going to work before we start layering other climbs on top of them and having this whole introducing new creative constraints to that process. So I think, if I'm setting some kind of like paddle dyno or a situation like that that involves a lot of large material, I'm going to test it as soon as possible so that I know they're going to live relatively, in this small amount of space. So, yeah,
Yeah,
testing early, fail faster.
makes sense. I want to shout out two PSAs, public service announcements from a climber's perspective, and either get your backup on it or tell me I'm totally wrong. Something I encounter this is more like to the route setters who may be listening. As a climber, the two things that I struggle with the most is easier climbs, especially easier routes, often lack feet. And I just know from being a setter that it's like you're in a harness, you're sitting from a draw or on a top rope, and you're clipped in, and it's like you don't go out and do the extra reach to put a foot chip out there to make that clipping stance better. And it's just can be frustrating. I always see these routes where I can just tell they just stayed within their wingspan. I'm like, oh, this really needed a foot chip. And along that same line, something that I know I did, and when I'm warming up, it always frustrates me is I can just tell when some setter was like, oh, I flipped the V8 tag. I put all my effort into it because I love V8s, and I just made the 6 V8 and the feet are everything's perfect. And then they flip the V2 tag and they just like whatever, here's like two holds, and who cares? It's just a V2. And just putting that care into all of the routes you do, just it makes my experience warming up, or if V2 is my max grade, having fun there too. So those are my PSAs.
Yeah, I mean, I've been setting for 20 something years, and I'm not sure anyone has ever come up to me and said, "Man, I think there's too many feet on this route." So I think you're totally right. Building and options into climbs and giving people uh, ways to unlock different body positions for themselves and solve puzzles in different ways is a very useful aspect of them understanding climbing movement and understand how their body works versus always having to fit within your box. Yeah, I think we've gotten a lot better at the allocation of really amazing resources in entry level climbs. I've used something. I can't remember who I got this from. Maybe Nick Klubja, talking about this idea of like sidewalks. So just putting like gigantic fiberglass features on the wall, but maybe it's V intro or V0. It's like the easiest climb in the gym, but you'll just see people gravitate to that experience that would maybe never want to climb something of that low of grade in their session because they just got to stand on the thing. So I think again, getting into like enticing comes into that allocation of resources as well, and making sure that everyone that comes in the gym gets the opportunity to stand on this amazing fiberglass hold or mantle up on top of this really cool volume. Those things need to happen at all levels, and for pretty much everyone that walks in the gym should have that opportunity.
Very cool. Love that sidewalk idea, and good Nika Klubja shout out. Also a great part of the saying community. Ward, thank you. Well, thank you for coming on today, but thanks for setting the tone for. I have no idea how many thousands of climbers. Maybe you don't either, but it's an important part of the sport that I feel like people. I don't know if you guys are unsung heroes. I think the awareness has come around a bit more about how crucial your role is, and yeah, it's cool hearing that journey that you've been on and seen all the changes for the last couple of decades. And I appreciate it as a climber. I look up to you as a setter, and I just want to say thank you for all the climbers who haven't even started yet, but they're gonna walk in, have a birthday party, have the time of their life, and then you might change the trajectory of their life, and they'll be the next Chris Sharma. So thanks, Ward.
Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. No, thank you. This has been super fun, and thanks for letting me tell my story.
It was a good one. And yeah, I hope to visit and climb on that V2 Ward banger sometime soon.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.